I'm Abigail Miller, President and CEO of Momentum Strategies. At 39 years old, I have almost everything most people want: a career, wealth, and most importantly, the freedom to shape my own life. But amid the glorious achievements of the present, a shrill voice from the past sometimes echoes like an old scar that suddenly stings when the weather changes. Abigail, listen carefully. With your stubborn, headstrong attitude, you will never amount to anything. You will die poor and alone, mark my words. It was the voice of my mother's younger sister, Brenda. That vicious curse haunted me throughout my miserable youth, becoming a kind of twisted motivation, pushing me to succeed, to prove her wrong. A gentle knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. The young secretary, Sarah, peeked in. "Mrs. Miller, there's a Mrs. Brenda Parker here. She says she's your aunt," Sarah said, her voice wavering, perhaps because the name Parker wasn't on my list of regular guests or business associates. A small, almost imperceptible smile spread across my lips. Brenda Parker. After nearly 20 years, this day had finally come. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest tighten, not with anxiety, but with a calm preparation for a confrontation that had been long planned. "Let her in." "Sarah," I said, my voice even and unruffled. The door opened. The woman who entered was almost unrecognizable to me. Time and the hardships of life had eroded Brenda's once fierce and arrogant appearance. Her gray hair was scraggly, her clothes were old, her eyes were sunken and tired. She looked around the office with a bewildered look, probably unable to believe that the niece she once despised now owned a space like this. Then an unexpected action stunned both me and perhaps her. Miss Brenda walked quickly toward my desk, and before I could say anything, she collapsed on the cold floor. Abigail." Her voice trembled, trailing off, tears streaming down her gaunt face. Please, please, help my Mark. He needs money for college. He just got an acceptance letter to NYU Computer Engineering, but the tuition is too much. I don't know what to do. Only you can help him." I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet, the one who had cursed me with the most vile words. A brief feeling of elation was quickly replaced by an indescribable complexity. This was not the victory I had imagined. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm but heavy with the weight of the years. "Get up. You want me to help your son Mark get into college." In that moment, the past and the present seemed to merge into one, and the story of my life, with all its bitterness, effort, and irony of fate, began to appear clearly. 20 years ago, I was a 20-year-old Abigail, fresh out of Boston University with a degree in business administration, full of ideas and aspirations. My family was middle class and lived in a small suburban town in Connecticut. The main source of income for the family was the carpentry business, Miller & Sons, a handicraft business that my grandfather, a talented and virtuous carpenter, had built with all his heart. He had passed away a few months earlier, leaving a huge void in the family and worries about the future of the carpentry business. That fateful family gathering took place on a gloomy Sunday afternoon, just a few weeks after his funeral. The atmosphere in our living room was heavy, unlike the cheerful weekend gatherings that had preceded it. My mother, Susan, sat huddled in an old armchair, her eyes still swollen from the grief of losing my father. My father, David, a quiet engineer, sat next to my mother, holding her hand, his eyes also filled with worry. And of course there was Brenda Parker, Mom's sister, and her husband, Uncle Frank. Brenda was a prominent figure at family gatherings in an unpleasant way. She was loud, judgmental, and thought she was the smartest and most knowledgeable, especially when it came to money. Uncle Frank, on the other hand, was a soft-spoken, quiet man whose decisions were mostly made by Brenda. Their son Mark, then just 5 years old, was playing around in the yard. My grandfather's will was clear: the carpentry shop and the house would go to my mother, but he also left a substantial amount of savings with the intention that the money would be used to maintain and grow the business he had worked so hard to build. That's why I spent weeks drawing up a detailed plan, a new vision for Miller & Sons. "I think we should invest in upgrading our machinery." I began, my voice full of enthusiasm, spreading out drawings and diagrams on the coffee table. Modernize our manufacturing process and expand our online distribution channels. We can reach a wider market than just our state. I've been researching e-commerce platforms, and the potential is huge. I passionately presented on branding, designing more modern models alongside maintaining traditional products, even looking for small export contracts. I believed that with the knowledge I learned and the love for my grandfather's heritage, I could take the carpentry workshop to the next level. My dad nodded, seeming to agree. That's a good idea, Abby. Times have changed, and we need to change too. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with pride but also a hint of worry. But isn't it too risky, the money your grandfather left behind? Before my mother could finish, Brenda spoke up, her voice as sharp as a razor. Risk, Susan, you're right. This isn't risk, it's throwing money away. Abigail, you're fresh out of college. What do you know about business? How can you be so pretentious? I was taken aback by her harsh tone. Ms. Brenda, I did my research. These are inevitable trends. What trend? Brenda sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. Dad's carpentry shop has been operating well for decades using the traditional method. There's no need for new machinery, no need for complicated online sales. In my opinion, the best thing is to sell the shop and divide the money quickly. Or if you want to keep it, let Frank manage it. After all, Frank is a man with more business experience. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Uncle Frank worked as a salesman in an auto parts store. What kind of business experience did he have? Besides, the carpentry workshop was my grandfather's heart and soul. How could he just sell it? Aunt Brenda, Uncle Frank has no experience in the wood industry. I tried to keep calm. And this is my grandfather's legacy. We should cherish and develop it. Respectfully, Brenda raised her eyebrows. Or do you want to take all the power and do whatever you want with my money? You're young and naive like an egg trying to be smarter than a duck. Don't think that just because you learned a few words at school you're better than adults. The argument grew more heated. Brenda kept attacking my plan, saying it was expensive, impractical, and implicitly suggesting that I had ulterior motives. Frank, as usual, just nodded along with his wife, occasionally interjecting a few pointed criticisms. That's right, business is tough these days, and if you're not careful you'll lose everything. My mother, gentle and impressionable by nature, began to waver. She looked at me doubtfully. Abby, maybe. Maybe we should take it slow. Let Frank help. Mom, I cried, feeling a surge of disappointment in my heart. How could you think that I did everything for the good of my family and my grandfather's carpentry shop? My dad tried to mediate. Come on, everyone calm down. Abby, maybe your plan needs a little rethinking. Brenda, don't be so hard on your child. But the flames of conflict had flared up. Brenda would not budge. She seemed determined to exclude me from all decisions regarding my grandfather's carpentry shop and property. The look she gave me was no longer one of mere displeasure, but of jealousy and hostility. The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere with no decision made. I returned to my room, my heart heavy. I couldn't understand why Brenda hated me so much. Was she afraid that I, a daughter, could do things that her son or even her husband couldn't? Or was it simply because she wanted to control everything and I was an obstacle? The atmosphere in the house was still very stuffy in the following days. I tried to talk to my mother privately, explaining my plan in more detail, but my mother seemed to have been shaken by Brenda's words. She just sighed, advising me to give in to her a little. Family harmony is paramount. I felt alone in my own home. My father occasionally patted my shoulder, but he was not strong enough to fully defend my idea against the opposition of my wife and sister-in-law. I knew that a bigger storm was waiting ahead. The storm hit sooner than I expected. About a week after the stormy family meeting, late one evening, as I sat in my room reviewing documents related to finding new sources of lumber, the house phone rang. My mother answered, and after a few words her face turned pale. She stammered for my father, then called me downstairs. Brenda was waiting in the living room, her expression unusually serious. Uncle Frank stood behind her, equally tense. There was no greeting, no usual small talk. An eerie silence fell. "What's wrong, Brenda?" my dad asked. His voice worried. Brenda didn't answer right away. She looked straight at me, a cold, accusing look. Then slowly she placed a stack of papers on the table. "Look," Brenda said, her voice strained with pain. "This is what I just discovered. The truth about our talented niece." My parents took the stack of papers and started looking at them. I was curious and approached them. They were a few bank statements from my grandfather's savings account, an account in which my mother was the main account holder, and I was authorized to make some small transactions related to market research for the carpentry workshop. Did you see that Brenda's voice began to rise dramatically? A large sum of money, $50,000, was withdrawn from his account 3 days ago, and the person who made the transaction was none other than Abigail. Here I was stunned. I had made a transaction, but it was money I intended to use as a down payment on a shipment of high-quality white oak lumber from a supplier in Oregon. They had a special offer for new customers, and I had discussed it with my father, though not formally, due to Brenda's objections. The money was still in a temporary account with the brokerage firm awaiting confirmation of the contract. "Wait, Brenda," I said quickly. "That money is for what?" Brenda interrupted me, her voice full of sarcasm. "To invest in those shady projects you've drawn up, to test the market, as you put it. I've had someone check the money was transferred to a company called Northwood Investments. Do you know what that company is? It's only been established for a few months, has no clear address, no decent website. It's clearly a ghost company." She pulled out another piece of paper which appeared to be a rough printout of Northwood Investments information she'd found online. "He was trying to scam us, take the money and run. He's so young and he's trying to scam his own family." "I can't believe it." Brenda started crying bitterly, recounting my efforts in taking care of the family since my grandfather fell ill, emphasizing my greed and ungratefulness. "We worked hard to take care of this factory and he only wanted to take your money. If my grandfather knew about this from the grave, he probably wouldn't be able to rest in peace." "That's not true," I shouted, feeling the blood rush to my face. "Northwood Investments is the company that represents the lumber supplier. I have all the emails. I have the draft contract. The money is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere." I tried to explain, searching through my briefcase, but my mother was devastated. She looked at me with utter despair, tears in her eyes. "Abby, how could you do this to our family? $50,000. That's a lot of money, do you know that?" "Mom, you have to believe me. I have no intention of deceiving anyone," I pleaded, handing the file to my mother, but my mother pushed my hand away. "That's enough, Abigail. I don't want to hear any more." My father stood there stunned. He looked at me then, at the papers Brenda had presented. His expression was complicated, filled with doubt-pain, but he had lost the absolute trust he had in me before. The evidence Brenda had presented, even if it was interpreted maliciously and one-sidedly, was enough to sow doubt in the mind of someone who was not very knowledgeable about complex financial transactions. "David, you see," Brenda turned to my father, her voice triumphant. "That's your daughter. We've spoiled her." Uncle Frank, as usual, added fuel to the fire. "I didn't expect. She looks so well-behaved." I felt like the world was spinning. The injustice and pain of being suspected and slandered by my own family made me choke. I tried to speak, tried to explain, but my voice was lost, leaving only sobs in my throat. My hands clenched the file until it turned white. The papers crumpled like my hopes at that moment. No one wanted to listen to me. No one believed me. In that moment, I realized Brenda's elaborate arrangement. She took advantage of my inexperience, my mother's gullibility, and my father's passivity to create a perfect drama, turning me from a passionate granddaughter into a fraud in the eyes of the whole family. Brenda's knowing half-smile as she looked at me through her fake tears was the last thing I remembered before everything became a blur of emotion. That stinging accusation was not just about the money, it was about my character, about my future, about everything I was trying to build. And it worked. My mother's rage and frustration reached a boiling point. She was no longer the gentle, caring mother I had known. What she saw now was the betrayal of the daughter she had loved and hoped for so much. "I never thought you would be like this, Abigail." Mom's voice trembled with anger and pain. "Grandpa's money, his sweat and tears, how could you—" "I didn't." I tried to protest again, tears rolling down my cheeks. "It's not like what Brenda said. Please give me a chance to explain, look at my records." But Brenda quickly interjected, leaving me no room to defend myself. What more can I say? The evidence is there, Abigail. You have failed this family. You don't deserve to be in this house anymore. Then she turned to my mother, her voice full of calculation but covered by a family appearance. Susan, you have to be tough. We cannot tolerate this behavior. Otherwise, he will do even more terrible things. For his future, as well as to maintain family discipline, we have to teach him a lesson. My mother, already confused and shaken by Brenda's words, nodded absent-mindedly. She looked at me, her eyes colder than ever. Brenda's right. You've disappointed me so much. It was then that Ms. Brenda struck the decisive blow, her words like knives stabbing into my heart. She approached, looked straight into my face, and said each word harshly, "This house cannot accommodate an unfilial, deceitful child like you. Wherever you go, don't ever show your face here again." And then the sentence that later became a deep imprint in my mind, a persistent curse. "You will die in poverty and loneliness. Remember my words." Brenda's words were like a death sentence for my relationship with my family. I looked at my father, looking for some hope, some defense. My father stood there, his face pale, his eyes looking at me full of pity, helpless, but he said nothing. He did not oppose Brenda, nor did he hold me back. His silence was more painful than 1,000 criticisms. It meant that he, to some extent, believed those slanderous words, or at least was not strong enough to resist the pressure from his wife and sister-in-law. My mother turned away, sobbing. She didn't want to look at me anymore. My heart was broken. Betrayal came from the people I loved and trusted the most. The house that used to be my home now became cold and strange. There was nothing left to hold on to, no one left to trust. My pride was severely damaged. I could not stay in this place for another moment. "Okay?" I said, my voice hoarse, fighting back tears. "If that's what you think of me, I'll go." I turned and walked up to my room. My whole body was shaking. I quickly grabbed a few clothes, my favorite professional books, and most importantly, the small savings I had from my part-time jobs during my student days. That was all I had. I didn't take anything else from this house, not even my grandfather's mementos. As I dragged my small suitcase down the stairs, no one said a word. Brenda stood there, arms folded, a triumphant look on her face. Uncle Frank looked away. My mother was still crying, not daring to look at me. My father stood like a statue, his eyes following my every step, a deep sadness in them, but he still did not act. I walked out the door without saying goodbye. That night, the rain poured down as if mourning my fate. The sound of the rain falling on the porch was cold and gloomy. When I pulled the door closed, a dry Sam sounded like an invisible knife cutting off all the ties between me and my family. The lonely figure of Abigail Miller, 20 years old, walked down the dark, wet street under the rain. I hugged my bag tightly to my chest as if holding on to the last bit of dignity I had left. I didn't know where I was going, what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to live to prove them wrong. Miss Brenda's curse would never come true. That night I caught the last bus out of Connecticut, headed for an unfamiliar city, carrying the pain of betrayal and a steely determination to stand up for myself. New York City greeted me with strangeness and coldness. With the little money I had left, I rented a tiny, damp room in a low-income neighborhood in Queens. The first few nights I curled up on a thin mattress, tears streaming down my face. The pain of being abandoned by my family, the injustice of the accusation, and the feeling of utter loneliness tormented my mind. The image of Brenda's triumphant face, my mother's disappointed eyes, my father's silence all swirled in my head, making it impossible for me to sleep. But after days of despair, my will to survive and my damaged self-esteem lifted me up. I couldn't let myself fall. I had to live, work, and prove my worth. Brenda's curse of dying in poverty and alone was like a needle pricking my flesh, reminding me not to be weak. I started looking for a job. With a first-class university degree, I thought finding an office job would be easy, but the reality was much harsher. With no real experience, no connections, no letters of recommendation, my resume was often overlooked. I had to start with the most menial jobs: waiting tables in a noisy Chinese restaurant, working as a seasonal saleswoman in a discount clothing store, even cleaning for a few wealthy families on the weekends. Every dollar I earned was soaked in sweat and tears of resentment. There were days when I was exhausted and wanted to give up everything, but then the image of my grandfather, a true carpenter with talented hands and a kind heart, appeared again. He always taught me about perseverance and the value of labor. I could not let him down. Life went on like that, lonely and harsh. I almost cut off all contact with the past. I didn't call home, nor did I receive any calls. Sometimes a longing for my mother and father ached in my heart, but then the hurt made me close the door to my soul. During my days working at a small coffee shop in Greenwich Village to earn extra money in the evenings, I happened to meet Arthur Harrison. He was a retired economics professor and a regular at the shop. He often sat in a secluded corner reading a book and sipping an espresso. At first, we exchanged only a few pleasantries, but gradually, Mr. Harrison began to notice the waitress with intelligent and thoughtful eyes. One evening, when the bar was empty, he asked me about the economics books I'd been reading during my break. I was surprised when he noticed. Then I boldly shared with him the business ideas and market analysis I had been nurturing for my family's carpentry shop. Mr. Harrison listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions. "You have a very sharp head, Abigail," he said after I finished. "Your ideas are practical and visionary. Why don't you try to implement them yourself?" I smiled sadly. "I have no money, Professor, and I have no family to support me." I didn't go into detail about my story, only implying that I was on my own. Mr. Harrison looked at me for a long moment, his eyes kind and understanding. A few days later, he sought me out privately. "I've thought a lot about what you said, Abigail," he said. "I believe in your potential. I want to invest in you." He offered me a loan of $20,000, no collateral, no interest. "This is not charity," he insisted. "This is an investment. I trust you to use it wisely and create value. When you succeed, pay me back. If you fail, consider it a small loss to buy a lesson for both of us." I was stunned. Tears welled up again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and emotion. In the midst of my darkness, a hand was extended, a belief was placed in me. "Professor, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything." Abigail, Mr. Harrison smiled. "Do something. Don't let anyone's harsh words extinguish the fire inside you. Prove them wrong." His words were like a breath of fresh air into my life. With that capital, the knowledge I had learned, and the bitter experience of failing with my family's carpentry business plan, I decided to start my own business. I founded a small consulting company, Momentum Strategies, with the goal of helping small and medium-sized businesses optimize their operations and develop online marketing strategies, the very things I had always wanted to do for Miller & Sons. The first days were extremely difficult. My office was just a small corner of my rented room. I did everything myself, from market research, building a business plan, finding my first customers, to designing a simple website and managing the accounting books. There were nights when I stayed up all night working on my old computer with only the street lights coming in through the window as my companion. My first client was a small bakery that was struggling to survive. I spent weeks analyzing their business, suggesting changes to their inventory management, building a simple sales website, and running small social media campaigns. After 3 months, the bakery's revenue increased significantly. The owner, a kind middle-aged woman, recommended me to her other business friends. Word of mouth spread. Gradually, Momentum Strategies began to get bigger clients and bigger contracts. I hired my first employee, then a second employee. The company moved to a more spacious office. I never forgot Mr. Harrison's advice to always work with dedication, honesty, and never stop learning. During the process of building my career, I also encountered many challenges. There were unfair competitors who deliberately played dirty tricks. There were difficult customers who made unreasonable demands. There were periods of tight cash flow that made me restless. But each time I remembered Brenda's curse, remembered Mr. Harrison's trust, and my will was tempered once again. I also do not forget to improve myself. I take courses on financial management, investment, and the art of negotiation. I read a lot of books and meet successful people to learn from their experiences. I understand that in order not to die in poverty, I not only need to earn money, but also know how to manage and multiply that money. 5 years after I left home in disgrace, Momentum Strategies had become a well-known consulting firm in the small and medium-sized business community in New York. I returned all my capital to Mr. Harrison along with a profit he had not initially asked for. He just smiled and said that my success was the greatest gift. 10 years later, I was a self-made millionaire. I had a luxurious penthouse in Manhattan with a panoramic view of the city. I had a talented and loyal staff. I was no longer the fragile, vulnerable Abigail. I was Abigail Miller, a strong, independent, successful businesswoman. I still think about my family from time to time. The pain has subsided, but the scars remain. I don't know how they are doing or if they ever regret what they did to me. But I don't let the past haunt me anymore. I focus on the present, on the future, on building a life I'm proud of. And then one day the past suddenly knocked on my office door in the form of Brenda Parker, the person who once cast the most vicious curse on my life. My office was silent except for Brenda's labored breathing and the ticking of an antique clock on the wall, a collectible I had collected on a business trip to Europe. I looked at the woman kneeling on the floor, her gray hair disheveled, her face deeply lined with misery and despair. The image was a stark contrast to the sharp, powerful Brenda I remembered, who had stood above me judging and cursing me. The elation, if there was any, was only a slight ripple and then it dissipated. Instead, a complex feeling, an eerie stillness enveloped me. I had been preparing for this moment for years, but when it actually happened, every scenario I had imagined fell into disarray. Brenda. I repeated, my voice maintaining the professional calm I had honed over thousands of negotiations. Get up. The floor is cold. We can talk like adults. Brenda raised her head, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me pleadingly. She slowly pushed herself up, but her legs seemed to be shaking and she had to hold onto the back of the chair to steady herself. Sarah, my secretary, had thoughtfully brought in a glass of warm water at some point and placed it gently on the table in front of Brenda. Thank you, Brenda mumbled, not daring to look me in the eye. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clutching her worn handbag. So your son Mark got accepted to NYU for computer engineering, I said, breaking the awkward silence. It's a great school, a promising major. Yes, sir. Mrs. Miller. Brenda stammered, the unfamiliar way of addressing me making me frown slightly. She's a very good student, very well behaved. She's dreamed of becoming an engineer since she was little. This is her only chance. For my whole family. She began to talk. Her husband Frank had died of cancer a few years ago after I left Brenda, and Frank had tried to take over my grandfather's carpentry business, but through ignorance, mismanagement, and repeated financial mistakes, the business had gone bankrupt. They had borrowed money from everywhere, mortgaged their assets. Finally, Miller and Sons. My grandfather's heart had to declare bankruptcy, was foreclosed on by the bank, and was auctioned off at a pittance. We lost everything, Abigail Brenda said, her voice breaking. We didn't even keep our grandparents' house. After Frank died, I had to work all kinds of jobs to put Mark through school. Life was hard. I listened without interrupting, without showing any particular emotion. Part of me felt sorry for the fate of the carpentry workshop, a precious heritage that I had passionately wanted to protect and develop. But another part of me saw this as the inevitable end of greed and ignorance. Mark was my only hope. Brenda continued, tears welling up again. He worked so hard, studying day and night to get a partial scholarship, but the remaining tuition, plus the cost of living in New York, was too much for me. I ran around everywhere, borrowed from relatives and friends, but no one could help. Then I heard people talking about him, about his success. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pleading and a little belated shame. Abigail, I know I was wrong to you back then. I treated you badly, but please, for the sake of our blood relationship, for the sake of our grandparents in heaven, please have mercy on Mark. He's innocent, he's not at fault in our adult affairs. Silence fell again. I looked out the window where the skyscrapers proudly rose into the blue sky. I had come a long way from the girl who was kicked out of her house that rainy night to this position. And now the person who had contributed to pushing me to that extreme path was asking for my help. What an irony of fate. Brenda, I finally said, my voice slow and clear. Do you remember what you said to me the night I had to leave home? Brenda's face paled. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. You remember? You said I would die poor and alone. I repeated, not to criticize, but to confirm an undeniable truth. Did you ever think that that curse might one day come upon you? Brenda didn't answer. Just a soft sob. My mind was in a storm right now. There was a fleeting sense of satisfaction at seeing the person who had hurt me now suffer retribution. There was the old pain still smoldering when remembering the slander and betrayal, but above all, there was a strength, a self-control that I had cultivated over the years. I was no longer the weak girl of the past, easily swayed by emotions. I stood up and walked to the window, turning my back on Brenda. I needed some space to collect my thoughts. You know, Brenda, I said, my voice steady, the years after I left home were the hardest years of my life. I had to do jobs you could never imagine. I was lonely. I was hopeless. I thought I would never get back up. I won't go into detail, not to get her pity, but to let her know that my success didn't fall from the sky. It was built with sweat, tears, and scars that never fully healed. But then I realized I continued that dwelling on the past, on resentment, would do no good. I had to save myself. And I did. I turned back, looking straight at Brenda. You said Mark was innocent. Yes, he was not at fault for what happened. He deserves a better future. Brenda's eyes flashed with a faint glimmer of hope. So you agree to help him, Abigail? I was silent for a moment, looking deep into her waiting eyes. This was the moment I had to make a decision that would not only affect Mark's future, but also shape how I dealt with my own past. Before I could reply to Brenda, something unexpected happened. The door to my office opened slightly and Sarah, my secretary, walked in, looking a little confused. Mrs. Miller, sorry to bother you, but there's your mother, Mrs. Susan Miller, downstairs. She said she had an appointment with you. My heart ached slightly. Mom. I hadn't seen her, hadn't spoken to her in nearly 20 years since that fateful night. I hadn't made an appointment with her. Could it be? Brenda was stunned too. She stammered, Susan, what is she doing here? I looked at Sarah, trying to stay calm. Sarah, bring her up here. I knew I had to face it all. Today seemed like a day of unexpected reunions. A moment later, my mother, Susan Miller, walked in. Time had not been kind to her. Her hair was white, her figure was thin, her face was deeply lined with age and perhaps sorrow. When she saw me and then Brenda sitting there with a panicked expression, my mother stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. Abby, you... Mom stammered, her voice shaking. Then she looked at Brenda. Brenda, what are you doing here? The atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense. 3 women, 3 fates linked by past traumas and secrets, were now present in the same space. Brenda, seeing my mother appear, seemed to lose all her remaining courage. She bowed her head, not daring to look at anyone. I took a deep breath. Mom, please sit down. I didn't know you were here, but maybe this is a good opportunity. My mother slowly walked in and sat down in the chair across from Brenda, her eyes never leaving me, then back to her sister, full of scrutiny and confusion. Brenda, I said, my voice calm but firm. Before we talk about Mark, I want you to answer a question, and I want you to answer it honestly in front of my mother and, more importantly, in front of your conscience. Brenda raised her head, her eyes red. Back then, I continued, the $50,000, the Northwood investments, was it true that I defrauded my family, or was it all just your setup? There was silence. My mother held her breath, staring at Brenda, waiting for an answer. Brenda's face went from white to red. She bit her lip, wringing her hands. Finally, as if she couldn't bear it any longer, Brenda burst into tears. It's your fault. Abigail, she confessed through her tears. It's all your fault. My mother gasped, her hands coming up to cover her chest, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Brenda, what are you saying? That year, I was jealous of you. Abigail, Brenda continued, her voice breaking. You were smart, active, had lots of ideas. I was afraid. I was afraid you would take all the love from your parents, all the favor in the family. I was afraid you would take control of the carpentry shop, pushing me and Frank aside. I wanted to manage my grandfather's money myself, wanted Frank to have a place in the shop, so She told me the whole story. About deliberately misrepresenting transactions, finding unfavorable, though not entirely accurate information about my partner company, and exaggerating everything to make me look like a fraud. She admitted that she had taken advantage of my mother's gullibility and my father's passivity. I didn't expect things to go this far, Brenda cried. I just wanted to scare you a little to make you humble. Who would have thought you would really leave? Later, when the carpentry shop went bankrupt, when Frank died of illness, I regretted it so much. I knew I was wrong, terribly wrong, but I didn't have the courage to face it, to confess. My mother sat there, stunned, tears streaming down her aged face. She looked at Brenda, then back at me, pain, regret, and shock evident in her eyes. Oh my God, Brenda, how could you? How could you do this to your child, to your own family? Then my mother turned to me, her voice choked. Abby, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm a bad mother. I didn't believe you. I let my sister's jealousy blind me. Baby, I'm sorry. She stood up, staggered towards me, wanted to hug me, but then stopped timidly as if afraid I would refuse. In that moment, the icy wall I had built around my heart over the years seemed to begin to melt. Seeing my mother's anguish, Brenda's cowardice, and belated remorse, I no longer felt anger. What remained was a deep sadness for what had been lost, for the years wasted in misunderstanding and bitterness. Justice, in a way, had been served, not by the law, but by this belated confession, by the guilt that Brenda would carry with her for the rest of her life. I looked at Mom, then at Brenda. A decision formed clearly in my mind. I don't forget what happened, I said, my voice shaking a little with emotion but still clear. The hurt will never completely go away. But I also don't want to live in the past in resentment. I turned to Brenda. You made a huge mistake, Brenda. A mistake that not only ruined my life for a long time, but also ruined your family, ruined your grandfather's legacy. But Mark, as you said, is innocent. He doesn't deserve to be held responsible for the mistakes of adults. I took a deep breath. I'm going to help Mark get into college. Brenda jerked her head up, eyes wide, unable to believe her ears. My mother looked at me with surprise and gratitude. I will cover all of Mark's tuition and reasonable living expenses for all 4 years of college at NYU, I said clearly. But there are conditions. What conditions? I accept any conditions, Brenda said hurriedly. First, I said the money will go directly into the university account and a separate account for Mark's living expenses, which I will manage directly. I don't want a single penny to go unspent. Okay. Brenda nodded vigorously. Second, I looked Brenda straight in the eye, my voice becoming stern. You must publicly apologize to me in front of the rest of my relatives who witnessed or heard about the incident. I need you to restore my honor, not because I want to humiliate you, but because the truth needs to be revealed. Justice needs to be served. Brenda's face paled at the condition. It was a punishment more painful than losing the money, facing the judgment and contempt of those she had tried to show superiority to. But for the sake of her son's future, she gritted her teeth and nodded. I agree. And finally, I turned to my mother. Mom, I will make sure you have a more comfortable old age. You don't have to live in poverty anymore, but our relationship, I think it needs time to heal. I can't forget everything right away. My mother sobbed. I understand, honey. I don't dare expect you to forgive me right away. Just give me a chance. I'm so grateful, Abby. She moved closer, and this time I didn't flinch. She hugged me, an awkward hug but full of affection after so many years apart. I felt her tremble, and a little warmth crept into my heart. The confrontation ended not with the exhilaration of victory, but with a strange peace. Justice was served not quite as I had imagined, but perhaps the best way for everyone. After Brenda and my mother left, the office returned to its usual silence. But this time the silence had a different meaning. It was no longer burdened by the ghosts of the past, but lighter, more serene. I stood by the window looking down at the people rushing below, feeling as if I had just lifted an invisible burden that had been weighing on my shoulders for the past 20 years. I didn't feel entirely satisfied that Brenda had paid for her mistakes. The remorse and shame she faced were perhaps more painful than any punishment. What mattered more was that the truth had been revealed, my honor had been restored, and my mother had finally come to her senses. Forgiveness. It's a complicated word. I can say that I have forgiven my mother because motherhood is a sacred bond, even though it seems broken at times. For Brenda, it may not be complete forgiveness but liberation. I free myself from the burden of resentment so that I am no longer bound by the past. The fact that she has to live with a guilty conscience and the loss of trust from those around her is a very expensive lesson. My life will now turn a new page. I am still Abigail Miller, a successful businesswoman, but my soul has found the peace I have been searching for all this time. I will continue to develop momentum strategies, continue to create value for society. And perhaps I will establish a scholarship fund named after my grandfather, Arthur Miller, to help poor students who have overcome difficulties but have talent and determination, people like me 20 years ago who need a support to fly high, fly far. I will not forget the past because it is a part of me, the painful lessons that have forged the strong Abigail of today. But I will not let it determine my future. I have won not over anyone else, but over myself and the adversities of fate. The last rays of the day cast long streaks across the office floor, warm and gentle. I smiled. An old chapter had closed, a new dawn awaited. Happiness for me now is not only material wealth, but also freedom of the soul, the ability to love and be loved, the joy of being able to help others and living a meaningful life. I suddenly thought about the women out there who may have gone through or are going through similar challenges as me, facing betrayal, false accusations, seemingly irreparable family conflicts. Each person will have a different way of facing and overcoming them. How did Abigail's story resonate with you? If you were in her shoes, faced with the betrayal of a loved one and then their pleas when you were in a different position, do you think you would have made the same decision as Abigail, or would you have chosen a different course of action? Share your feelings and thoughts.